Her body was a silhouette of suffering against the gray morning mist, impaled and hanging from a barbed wire fence. It was a silent testament not just to active cruelty, but to the cold indifference of a world that had forgotten her. With every shallow breath, the life inside her, and the new lives she carried in her womb, faded closer to oblivion. Her time was not measured in days, but in fading heartbeats. But in a world that had turned away, one small boy did not. His appearance through the fog marked the beginning of an unbelievable rescue. A story that will prove that the quietest heart can roar with the courage of a lion. This is a journey you will not want to miss a single moment of. We invite you to subscribe so you can follow this extraordinary story of survival from its darkest hour to its most beautiful dawn. The mist of an Ozark spring was a living thing. It clung to the shoulders of the hills and settled deep in the hollows, muffling the world in a blanket of damp, silent gray. For Leo, it was a secret world. A slender 10-year-old boy with a mop of brown hair that refused to be tamed, and the quiet demeanor of a forest creature himself. He preferred the company of the ancient oaks and hickories to the noisy chatter of the schoolyard. His eyes, a deep and thoughtful shade of brown, missed very little, from the way a spider spun its web across a fern to the subtle track of a deer in the soft earth. This morning, like most, he had slipped out of his small house at the edge of Stone Creek, Arkansas, drawn by the smell of wet leaves and the promise of solitude. He walked with a light step, his boots making soft imprints in the muddy trail. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of a world reawakening after winter. He was heading for his favorite spot, a small clearing where a stream tumbled over mossy rocks, when he heard it. It was a sound that did not belong. Not the chatter of a squirrel, nor the call of a blue jay. It was a thin, high whimper, a note of pure misery that was nearly swallowed by the dense fog. It stopped, then started again, weaker this time, a sound of pain so profound it made the hair on Leo's arms stand up. He froze, his head cocked, listening. It came from the direction of the Caldwell property, a vast and forbidding expanse of land owned by the most powerful family in the county, a place children were told to avoid. Curiosity, mingled with a strange sense of dread, pulled him off the trail. He moved cautiously, pushing aside wet branches that showered him with cold droplets. The whimpering grew clearer, more desperate, and it guided him toward a long, straight line of darkness cutting through the woods, the old barbed wire fence that marked the Caldwell's territory. And then he saw her. His breath caught in his throat, and for a long moment he could not move, could not think. He could only stare at the scene of silent, brutal suffering. A German shepherd, large and beautifully built, was trapped on the fence. She was not merely caught. She was a prisoner of wire and pain. A strand of rusted barbed wire had snagged deep in the flesh of her flank and hind leg, and in her struggle to get free, she had only entangled herself further. Her body was suspended in a horribly unnatural position, her back paws barely touching the ground. Her thick coat of black and tan was matted with mud and dark, dried blood. Her belly was swollen and round, heavy with puppies. But it was her eyes that broke Leo's heart. They were amber pools of defeated light, glazed with exhaustion, and an agony so deep it seemed to have extinguished all hope. She was no longer fighting, only trembling, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps that sometimes hitched into that terrible, weak whimper. Fear was a cold knot in Leo's stomach, but something stronger rose to meet it. A wave of pity so overwhelming it pushed the fear aside. He knew about the Caldwells. Everyone did. But this creature, helpless and dying, knew nothing of reputations or property lines. She only knew pain. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. The dog's head lifted, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. But it was a sound of terror, not aggression. "It's okay," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm not going to hurt you. He kept his voice low and soft, the way he would talk to a frightened bird. He could see now that she was young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, a magnificent animal brought to this horrific state. He crept closer, inch by inch, until he was only a few feet away. He could see the sharp barbs embedded in her skin, the torn flesh around them. He knew he couldn't free her himself. He would only cause more harm. But he couldn't leave her. He slipped off his worn denim jacket, the only barrier he had against the morning chill, and gently, carefully, he draped it over her back, making sure the soft lining covered the sharp wire. It was a small, inadequate gesture, but the dog's trembling seemed to lessen just a fraction. She watched him, her amber eyes filled with a silent, desperate question. He had to get help. He had to get his mom. The thought of leaving her alone again was agonizing, but it was the only way. "I'll be back," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise. Just hold on." He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off her until the mist began to swallow her form. Then he turned and ran, his small legs pumping, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He ran with a single burning purpose, bursting out of the silent woods and into the small yard of his house, throwing the door open. His mother, Sarah, was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She was a woman in her late 30s, a part-time nurse at the local clinic. Her face, framed by dark blonde hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, was kind, but the lines around her eyes spoke of long shifts and little rest. She looked up, her expression of mild surprise, turning to alarm at the sight of her son's pale face and frantic eyes. "Leo, what is it? Where's your jacket?" "Mom!" he gasped, struggling to catch his breath, his words tumbling over one another. "In the woods, by the Caldwell fence. There's a dog. She's hurt. She's stuck." "Mom, you have to come now!" For a heartbeat, Sarah was frozen, her mind struggling to process her son's frantic words. Then, her years of training as a nurse took over, a calm wave washing over the initial shock. She stood up, her movements swift and efficient. "Show me," she said, her voice steady. She grabbed a thick blanket from the hall closet, her small first aid kit from the bathroom, and her phone. As she followed Leo out the door, she was already dialing their neighbor. Mr. Henderson, a retired mechanic in his late 60s with a barrel chest and hands that looked strong enough to bend steel, answered on the second ring. He listened to her brief, urgent explanation without interruption, and simply said, "I'll get my wire cutters. Meet you on the trail." Leo led them back through the misty woods, his small form a beacon of purpose in the gray light. The scene was exactly as he had left it, a tableau of silent suffering. The German shepherd's eyes were closed now, her breathing almost imperceptible. Mr. Henderson let out a low whistle. "Lord have mercy," he muttered, assessing the tangled wire. He went to work with a practiced calm, his heavy cutters snipping through the rusted strands with loud, final clicks. The dog's eyes flew open at the sound, a low, terrified snarl vibrating in her throat. She struggled weakly, her body tensing with renewed panic. "Leo, talk to her," Sarah commanded softly, positioning the blanket. "Let her hear your voice." Leo moved closer, his heart aching at her fear. "It's okay," he said, his voice a gentle murmur. "We're helping you. It's okay now." As he spoke, a strange stillness settled over the dog. The growl subsided, replaced by a faint whimper, and she stopped fighting, surrendering her weight to them as Mr. Henderson cut the last strand free. Working together, they gently wrapped her limp body in the thick blanket and carried her, a heavy, tragic burden, back to Mr. Henderson's old pickup truck. Leo climbed into the truck bed without hesitation, sitting beside the wounded animal as they drove toward town. He rested a small, steadying hand on her head, whispering to her the whole way, It was there, in the quiet rumble of the truck, that he gave her a name. He called her Dusk, for the fading light he saw in her eyes, a light he was desperate to save. Dr. Evans's veterinary clinic was a small, clean building on the edge of Stone Creek. Dr. Evans himself was a man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and a calm, weary face that had seen too many seasons of suffering and relief. He met them at the door, his professional gaze taking in the situation instantly. "Bring her in! Bring her in!" Table 3. Inside the sterile brightness of the exam room, Dusk's terror returned tenfold. As Sarah and Dr. Evans carefully lifted her onto the cold steel table, she came alive with fear, her head whipping around, teeth bared in a desperate attempt to defend herself. "Easy, girl," Dr. Evans soothed, but the dog was beyond hearing. Her body was rigid with pain and fear. "She's going into shock. I might have to sedate her to even examine the wounds," he said, reaching for a syringe. "Wait," Sarah said, a sudden thought striking her. "Leo, come here. Talk to her, just like you did in the woods." Leo approached the table, his small face etched with worry. He ignored the bared teeth and the low snarls. He simply reached out and placed his hand on the dog's neck, right behind her ear. "Hey, Dusk," he whispered. "It's just me. You're safe." The change was instantaneous and breathtaking. It was like a current of stillness flowed from the boy's hand into the terrified animal. The dog's snarling ceased. The rigid posture softened. She let out a long, shuddering sigh and laid her head down on the table, her amber eyes fixated on Leo's face in a silent miracle of trust. Sarah and Dr. Evans stared, speechless. It was a connection that defied all logic. With Dusk now strangely cooperative as long as Leo was touching her, Dr. Evans was able to conduct his examination. His face grew more grim with each discovery. "The lacerations are deep, right down to the muscle. They'll need surgery. She's severely dehydrated, and the risk of a systemic infection is extremely high. On top of that, the trauma has put the pregnancy in a very precarious state." He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with professional sympathy. "This is going to be a long road, Sarah, and an expensive one." Sarah's heart sank. She was a single mother. Her part-time nursing salary stretched thin just to cover bills and keep food on the table. She looked at the wounded dog, at the advanced medical equipment Dr. Evans was already preparing, and a cold dread washed over her. "Do you know who she belongs to?" Dr. Evans asked gently. Leo, who had not moved from his post, answered in a small voice. "The fence?" It was the Caldwell's fence. A shadow passed over Dr. Evans's face. He nodded slowly, his expression tightening. "I see." He didn't need to say more. Everyone in Stone Creek knew the Caldwell family. They were difficult, powerful, and not known for their kindness, especially when it came to their animals. The knowledge settled like a stone in Sarah's stomach. She looked at her son, who stood like a loyal guardian beside this broken creature, and then at the dog, who was only calm because of him. A fragile hope had been kindled in this sterile room, a bond of pure, unexplainable trust. But now, that hope was threatened by the harsh reality of staggering costs and the looming shadow of a family it was dangerous to cross. The next few days unfolded in a tense, quiet rhythm. Dusk survived the initial surgery to repair her wounds, but she was a shadow of the magnificent animal she was meant to be. She lay quietly in a large recovery kennel at the back of the clinic, hooked up to an IV drip, her amber eyes following Leo's every move. After school each day, Leo would sit on a stool beside her kennel, doing his homework or just talking to her in a low, constant murmur. Sarah would join them after her shifts, her heart caught in a painful tug of war between relief at the dog's survival and the gnawing anxiety of the mounting vet bill. The fragile peace shattered on the fourth afternoon. Sarah had just arrived when Dr. Evans came out of the back room. his calm face tight with concern. "It's Dusk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "She's in distress. I think the trauma has induced premature labor." He led them to the kennel where Dusk was panting heavily, her body trembling not from fear, but from the strain of a new crisis. Her body, already weakened by injury and infection, was not ready for this. "She's too weak to deliver them naturally," Dr. Evans stated grimly. "We have to do an emergency C-section. Right now." The world narrowed to the sterile white walls of the operating room door. Leo stood beside his mother, his hands clenched into small, tight fists, his face pale with a terror that left him mute. Sarah put her arm around his shoulders, her own medical knowledge making the risks horrifyingly clear. The wait felt like an eternity. Each tick of the clock in the waiting room a hammer blow against the fragile silence. Finally, the door opened, and Dr. Evans appeared, his surgical mask hanging around his neck, his expression one of utter exhaustion. "She's okay," he said, and Sarah felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. "She's a fighter, and so are her puppies." He managed a small, tired smile. 3 of them. He led them to a warming incubator where 3 tiny, wriggling forms lay huddled together. 2 were robust, dark-furred puppies, already instinctively seeking warmth, but the 3rd was terrifyingly small. And still, his pale fur a stark contrast to his siblings. He was barely breathing. "This little one is very weak," Dr. Evans said gently. "His lungs aren't fully developed. We'll do everything we can, but you need to be prepared, Leo." Sarah's heart ached, but Leo simply shook his head, his gaze fixed on the tiny creature. He pressed his hand to the warm glass of the incubator. "He just needs a name," he whispered, his voice filled with unshakable conviction. "His name is Spark, because he has a little spark in him. You just have to see it." From that moment, saving Spark became Leo's singular mission. Under Dr. Evans's guidance, he and Sarah began a tireless vigil. Every 2 hours, Leo would carefully lift the tiny puppy, wrapped in a soft cloth, and use a small dropper to squeeze single drops of formula into his mouth. He would hold him close, whispering words of encouragement, telling him about the sun and the trees and his mother, who was waiting for him. It was a battle fought in whispers and droplets. For days, Spark remained fragile, a life hanging by the thinnest of threads. Then, one evening, as Leo held the dropper to his mouth, the tiny puppy latched on himself, sucking with a surprising strength. He let out the faintest squeak, a sound of life that was the most beautiful music Leo had ever heard. A miracle, born not of magic, but of a little boy's relentless love. A week later, a new kind of peace had settled in the clinic. Dusk was recovering in a large kennel, and with her, nestled against her warm side, were her 3 puppies. Spark was still small, but he was active, wrestling playfully with his siblings. Leo sat on the floor with them, a gentle smile on his face, the picture of pure contentment. The bell on the clinic's front door chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound. A man stepped inside, bringing with him a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, and dressed in a tweed sport coat and dark trousers that seemed out of place in their humble town. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he moved with an air of quiet, unshakable authority. His face was a mask of Southern respectability, but his eyes, pale and sharp, held no warmth. They were the eyes of a hawk, assessing everything in the room for its value. He walked directly to the front desk where Sarah was standing. "I am Robert Caldwell," he announced, his voice smooth and cultured, yet hard as granite underneath. He did not ask how she was. He did not offer a greeting. "I was informed you have some property of mine here." He glanced past her, his cold gaze sweeping toward the back room where the sounds of the puppies could be faintly heard. He wasn't looking for a lost pet. He was a man who had come to collect an asset. Dr. Evans stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the imposing figure of Robert Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, his tone professional and even. The dog, Dusk, was in critical condition. She wouldn't have survived another few hours on that fence. She and the puppies require ongoing medical care. Caldwell waved a dismissive hand, his cold eyes unmoved. He placed a fine leather folder on the counter and opened it with a snap. Inside were pristine, official-looking documents. "Her name is Empress von Falkenstein," he stated, his voice dripping with condescension. "These are her pedigree papers and proof of ownership. I am not responsible for veterinary bills incurred without my consent. I am here to collect my property. The bitch and her litter." The clinical, detached words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Before Dr. Evans could protest further, Caldwell insisted on seeing the dogs. Reluctantly, the veterinarian led him toward the back. Sarah, acting on a sudden sharp instinct, pulled out her phone and discreetly started a video recording, holding it low by her side. Leo was sitting on the floor of the large kennel, little Spark asleep in his lap, while the other two puppies tumbled over his legs. Dusk lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, a look of weary contentment on her face. The moment Robert Caldwell appeared in the doorway, that peace was annihilated. Dusk scrambled to her feet, a sound ripping from her throat that was not a warning growl, but a high, keening noise of pure terror. She scrabbled backward, pushing her puppies behind her with her body, her fur bristling and her body trembling violently. Her eyes were wide, with a frantic, horrified recognition. Caldwell simply scoffed, his lip curling in disgust. "Insolent animal," he muttered. "Clearly needs to be reminded of her discipline." He took a step forward, and Dusk flattened herself to the floor. A low, desperate snarl, her only defense. "That's enough," Dr. Evans said sharply, blocking his path. Sarah stopped the recording, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. She had it. It wasn't much, but it was the truth, captured in the raw, undeniable terror of a helpless animal. Caldwell left them with an ultimatum. He would return in 24 hours to collect his dogs. If they were not ready, his lawyers would handle the matter. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. When he was gone, a heavy silence filled the clinic. Sarah showed the video to Dr. Evans. He watched it, his expression grim. "It's powerful," he admitted, rubbing his tired face. "It shows a clear fear reaction. But against a man like Caldwell and his lawyers, it might not be enough. A dog's fear is hard to prove in court. We need a human voice to tell us why she's so afraid." He paused, looking at Sarah. "I know some people. A small group, but they're fighters. They're called the Ozark Animal Guardians." Within the hour, Sarah was on the phone with the director, a woman named Maria whose voice was weary but held a core of steel. She listened intently as Sarah recounted the story. "Robert Caldwell," Maria said, the name leaving a bad taste. "We've heard whispers about him for years. Never been able to get anything to stick." She fell silent for a moment. "I might know someone. A man named Silas Blackwood. He was a groundskeeper on the Caldwell estate until about a year ago. Fired without cause. Or so I heard. He might know something. But Sarah, be prepared. People are terrified of the Caldwells. He may not be willing to talk." "Pack!" Maria gave her the number, and Sarah dialed, her heart pounding. A man's voice answered, cautious and rough around the edges. "Yeah? Is this Mr. Silas Blackwood?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her own voice steady. "Who's asking?" The voice was suspicious. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. She told him about the dog on the fence, the puppies, the vet bills, and Mr. Caldwell's demands. Silas listened without a word, his silence heavy and discouraging. "Look, lady," he finally said, his tone flat. I'm sorry about your dog, but I can't help you. I don't get involved with the Caldwells. Nobody does. He was about to hang up. Desperate, Sarah changed her approach. It's not for me, she said, her voice cracking slightly. It's for my son. He's 10 years old. He's the one who found her. He sat with her in the woods so she wouldn't be alone. He named the puppy that was dying Spark. And he held him for days until he was strong enough to live. He doesn't understand ownership papers or lawyers. All he knows is that Dusk and her babies are scared, and he wants to protect them. She trailed off, her throat tight with emotion. The silence on the other end of the line stretched on, long and absolute. When the man finally spoke, his voice was completely different, stripped of its harshness and thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Where can we meet?" Silas Blackwood asked. The air in Dr. Evans's clinic the next morning was thick with a tension you could almost touch. Robert Caldwell's 24-hour ultimatum was nearly up. In the small waiting room stood Sarah and Leo, Dr. Evans, and Maria from the Ozark Animal Guardians. Beside them, looking out of place but standing tall, was Silas Blackwood. He was a man in his 50s. His face weathered by years of outdoor work. His hands calloused and still. He was visibly nervous, but when he looked at Leo, a quiet resolve settled in his eyes. Mr. Caldwell arrived precisely on time, not alone, but with a sharp-suited lawyer at his side. He radiated an aura of impatient victory, expecting to simply sign a release and take his property. Maria stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Caldwell's arrogance. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, "before any animals are moved, we need to discuss the circumstances of their recovery." Caldwell's lawyer began to speak, but Maria held up a hand. "First, we have Dr. Evans's official report detailing life-threatening injuries consistent with prolonged neglect. Second," she said, placing Sarah's phone on the counter and playing the video, "we have this." The small room filled with the sound of Dusk's terrified snarls. Caldwell's face tightened, but he scoffed. "A frightened animal. It proves nothing." "Perhaps," Maria said, her gaze steady. "But maybe he can shed some light on why she is so frightened." She gestured to Silas. "Mr. Caldwell, I believe you know Mr. Silas Blackwood." The color drained from Caldwell's face. For the first time, his mask of untouchable superiority slipped. Silas looked at the powerful man who had fired him without a second thought. Then he looked at Leo, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. That was all the courage he needed. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room with its undeniable truth. "I saw him," Silas said. "I saw him take a heavy stick to her when she wouldn't bark aggressively enough at strangers. I saw her left on a chain with nothing but frozen water in the middle of winter. The animals on that property, they ain't family. They're tools. When they break, he throws them away." "This is slander." "Lies from a disgruntled employee," Caldwell hissed, his composure shattering into rage. "Then perhaps you can explain it all to the state police," Maria said smoothly. "We are prepared to file a formal animal cruelty complaint, supported by the vet's report, this video, and a sworn affidavit from Mr. Blackwood. I've also spoken to the editor of the regional newspaper. He's very interested in the story of a local boy's heroic effort to save the dog that one of the state's most prominent families left to die on a fence." That was the final blow. It wasn't the law Caldwell feared most. It was the stain on his family's pristine, long-standing reputation. A public scandal was a fire that even his money couldn't easily put out. His lawyer leaned in and whispered urgently in his ear. Caldwell's face was a mask of fury, but he gave a single, curt nod. Maria laid out the terms. Caldwell would sign a legally binding document relinquishing all ownership of Empress von Falkenstein and her 3 puppies to the Ozark Animal Guardians. In return, the complaint would not be filed. The organization had already started a small community fundraiser, she explained, which would provide a modest rehoming fee to finalize the transfer. It gave him an out, a way to frame it as a transaction, not a surrender. Without another word, his jaw clenched tight, Robert Caldwell signed the papers, turned his back on the dog he had tormented, and walked out of their lives forever. The silence he left behind was broken by a collective sigh of relief, followed by Sarah's quiet, joyful tears. That evening, their small house felt different. It felt bigger, brighter, and infinitely more full. Dusk, now free from the shadow of her past, explored every corner of her new home, her movements cautious at first, then more confident. Her tail, for the first time, gave a slow, hopeful wag. On a soft blanket in the living room, her 3 puppies tumbled and played, a bundle of clumsy, happy energy. And in the middle of it all sat Leo, his face alight with a smile so pure it seemed to illuminate the entire room. Spark, the tiny fighter who had clung so desperately to life, was now strong enough to playfully chew on the end of Leo's shoelace. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them, her heart swelling with a love so profound it ached. The worry over the vet bills, the fear of the confrontation, it all faded away into insignificance. She realized that her son's quiet courage had done more than just save 5 precious lives. It had sparked the conscience of a community, and had, in turn, made their own small family of 2 feel perfectly, wonderfully whole. This story reminds us that the most profound courage often comes not from a loud roar, but from the quiet, unwavering love of a single heart. It shows us that a family isn't just something you are born into, but something you build, one act of kindness at a time. Our journey is to find these moments of hope and share them with the world. If you wish to be a part of every rescue and every new beginning, we hope you will subscribe, ensuring that stories like Dusk's always find their way to you.